So right now we have some asteroids that spawn into the scene, float around. We could shoot them, we could break them up, it can add points to our overall score, but there's no way for the player to enter any sort of lose state. So let's set up some stuff with our spaceship. Okay, so on our spaceship, we have this damage FSM. And remember before I added in that 2D collision enter, right? So like we will put that in, but just for a second, I want to remind you that when you play this game, let's just see what happens. When I play this, okay, right now it didn't happen. There's no asteroids around us, but there is a chance that when the game starts, that that asteroid spawned right on top of us, and that would get an insta kill, and that's just not fair to the player. So what we want to do is before we put in, just if we right click, add global transition, system events, collision 2D enter, right? This is sort of counting as us being like hit by bullet or asteroid, right? Before we start listening for this event to fire off this transition, we want to start the FSM by turning off our collider, right? So we want to be able to turn this off so that for the first few seconds of spawning in, nothing can hurt us. And then we'll also make the player sort of blink on and off to kind of show that, okay, we're sort of in this little spawn moment where you're invincible, right? So the way we could do that is, first of all, let's just get this component, right? This polygon collider 2D. What we can do is type in get component, okay? So we can say on this game object, we have a component that is polygon collider 2D. So we have to go to variables, and we'll say that we're making a new object, which is just another way of saying a component. And we'll call this our collider, and you can specify the object type after you create it. You can come down here, it says name and the value, and you have the object type. So the object type, if you go to Unity Engine and then you go to collider 2D, okay, so it's going to be looking for a 2D collider, which is this one right here. There's several different ones. You have your circle and square, etc., but the only thing we need to know is that it's a 2D collider. So over here in the get component, we could store that as our collider. And then what we can do is set the property of that collider. So we can set property, and we're saying that the property of the component collider, right? So now the property that we want to change is enabled. Now this value right here is setting whether or not it's enabled. So if it's off, that'll mean, so if this value isn't checked, that means that this will be disabled. And if it is checked, that means it's enabled. And it's a one-to-one thing. It just, this matches this. So it's like off, on, off, on, off, on, right? So right now it's on, and it'll turn it off if it's like that, okay? So what we want to do is we'll have it on. We can have it off by default actually over here, and then we'll also just make sure that it's programmatically also being set off right now. And then we could put in a blink effect, and all this is going to do is make sure that this little sprite render right here just turns on and off. It's literally just going to make it blink. Okay, we could just say that it's turning on and off, off for 0.2 seconds, on for 0.2 seconds. And then we could put in a wait action here at the bottom, and we'll say that the amount of time is actually a variable that we'll call this like invincible time. Okay, and then we'll say edit this. And let's say that we'll make this an input just so we can edit it down here. And we'll say our invincible time is like 3 seconds. Okay, so you're invincible for the first 3 seconds that you spawn in. Now, when this is done with, we'll say that it fires next. Okay, and that'll take us to the next state, which is where we are active. Okay, and here we are invincible. So when this is all done, we go here. And let's actually take this set property. I'm going to copy it by hitting Control C. You can also right click on it and say copy selected actions. And you can come over here and you can paste actions, or you can hit Control V or Command V on a Mac. Okay, so I paste this in, except this time we're going to enable it. So we're setting this to true because now we want this polygon collider to be on, and now we can take damage. If something hits us, we do something. We can fire off this. But while we're in this invincible state, since this is disabled, this collision enter 2D right here will not do anything. It can't do anything. It won't. This will never fire off. But once we get here, we could eventually get sent to the state if something collides with us. So this gets set to that, and then we also want to turn. We can set the set visibility, and I'm turning off reset on exit. and I'm going to say that we are visible. Okay, so while it's blinking over here, we might be mid-blink, like on an off. We can't see this state, and when we get over here, we just want to make sure that we can see it. So we're setting visible to true. So we're saying that our collider is on and our visibility is on. Okay, so both of those values will be enabled when we're in this active mode. And then here in our collision 2D, we can do the destroy self thing. Okay, now, like I said before, if we destroy it, there's no way of sort of coming back after that. So what we want to do is set something up so we can actually instantiate, we can spawn in the player at runtime. Whenever they die, we can spawn in another one. And when the game starts, we spawn in the first one, et cetera, et cetera. So destroy self is fine now, but that means that this needs to be a prefab. So we're going to go to the project. And in our prefabs folder, I'm going to drag and drop this spaceship in here. So now we have a prefab, and that means that we can select the one in the scene and delete it from the scene. Okay, so there's nothing in here now, which means that we need to set up some logic for our game loop to put in our player's spaceship at runtime and to spawn them back in when they die. So for our game object right here, we have our score, we have our asteroid spawner. Let's add a new FSM and call this one game loop. Okay, I'm going to hit edit. And we're going to edit our game loop here. This is a little habit that I want to show you. So what the habit is when you're designing a new system, you have your start state here, right? Your state 1. You always get this by default. What I like to do is to just add a finish transition to it, and then take our finish transition and send that to another state. And this is sort of just a default habit that I have. I very rarely start programming on the first state. And the reason for that is because later on, as I add new logic to the system, what I would like to do is just make it so I can scooch this down, add a new state, and change this. And if I have anything to scooch in, I can always just add it in after that, right? Otherwise, if I want something to happen before this state, well, I have to create a new one, and then I have to right-click and say set as start state. And then I can add transition to this and send off to that. So it's like there is this little extra step of changing what the start state is and sort of moving things around like that. So it's just a little habit I have, and I'm going to do that here. So a lot of times too, I'll just call this init for initialization, just little first steps that it needs to do. This first state here though, what I want to do for our game loop is let's just create object, and we're going to create the player. So we're going to come in here, say our assets, we want to take our spaceship, okay? We're going to create that and store it as a new variable called our player, right? So it's going to create a clone of the spaceship, and it's going to say, hey, that clone that we just created, that's this variable now, player. The position is 000. Okay, so let's actually play that to make sure it works. Okay, there we go. Look at us, we're blinking, and then, right, we're there. So I just want to play that one more time. You see that we spawn in the middle of the screen right there. Okay, and when I'm blinking, you see that I was invincible for a second. I eventually crashed into that thing, but let me just play it a couple more times. Okay. See, I was able to fly like within that asteroid for a second. Okay. See, I almost flew through that asteroid entirely. So that's cool. Our little sort of default invincibility state is working, and we're instantiating the player into the scene at the beginning. Now, the one thing that's happening that we don't want is that when the player dies, that's just it, right? They're just dead, and now we can't, like, nothing's happening here, right? So what we want to happen is for just our lives to be decreased, right? Because I think the sort of classic game loop is that you have a certain amount of lives, and each time your player hits something, a life gets removed, and when you hit 0 lives, then that's the game over point, and that's what your high score is, however long you're able to last off of that many lives. However many points you were able to collect while you had that many lives, okay? So our game loop here, what we could do is we can call this state right here spawn player. And when this is done, it'll send to a new state where we can say play level. Okay, so this is just us playing the level now. And there will be 2 events that we can send off from here. One will be player hit. And I'm going to make this a global event. And that way it could be sent from anywhere else in the game. I'm going to make it a local transition though. So we'll add the transition, player hit. And so what it'll do is send down here to lose life. Okay. And we'll put in some logic here for losing a life. You know, you can make another FSM that's like called like lives or something like that. But I think honestly, it's easy enough for us to just put that logic here in this state. So we can do an int subtract, and we'll say that there's a new variable called lives, and we subtract 1 from it. Now what we want to do is put in an int compare. So we're comparing our lives to the number 0. And that is to say that if our lives is equal to 0, or if our lives is less than 0 or greater than 0, right? We can send an event for each one of those, right? So the logic for equal, less than, and greater than can all do something different. If we're equal to 0, then that means game over. So we can make a new event called game over. We'll add that transition, and that'll go over here to a game over state. If lives is greater than 0, then we make an event called next life. Okay, and we'll make this transition come over here for a sec, where we'll just do a little wait. Okay, we'll do wait here, and we'll make the player wait like 2 seconds, and then when this finishes, it can send back up here to spawn player. Okay, so the idea is that you're playing the level, and then if you get hit, we subtract a life, and then we say, okay, wait a couple seconds, and then after you're done waiting, it spawns you in again. Okay, so now all we need to do is make sure that this player hit transition gets sent off. So we can send that from our player when we go to our spaceship, and on our damage FSM, when we're hit, before we destroy self, we can send an event. We could say it's a broadcast all. We're going to exclude ourselves, but we can send the global event player hit. Okay, so now it'll send that event before it dies, and that means that if we watch this and give this a test right here in this playing level, right, so we could just move around, but as soon as I hit one of these asteroids, okay, it goes to lose life. And actually, this didn't quite work because lives by default was 0, so we actually went into -1, and there is no logic for less than, because we should never be in -1. So let's make that one quick change. Let's right click on lives and hit edit a variable. I'm gonna make this an input just so we could see it over here. We can test this out as we go along, and we'll say that it's 3, right? The default lives is 3. And so now when I press play, I can move around and then see we're here in the state, but as soon as I hit this, boom, destroys us, and then we spawn in again, right? Now we have 2 lives. I'm gonna hit this asteroid, boom. Now we have 1 life, spawned in, and thankfully we're blinking in the beginning. We have that invincibility, otherwise that one would have killed us. And then if I do this, boom, hit this, 0 lives, and look at that, we're now in game over. Okay, so now we could put in logic for going to the game over screen. And so to display that lives count, what we can do is every time we spawn the player in, we can put in a UI text set text. Okay, and we're going to say that it's on a new object. So I'm going to take this score text, I'm going to have it selected, I'm going to hit Control D, or you can hit Command D on a Mac, hit F2 while it's selected so I could rename it, and I'll call this one lives text. Okay, and this one I'm going to scooch over in the corner over here. Okay, and I'm actually going to make this a left aligned number. And now what I could do is drag and drop our lives text into here, and then on this text we can use the variable, and we're going to convert lives. Okay, so when we play this, it should just automatically get set to 3. Great. Okay, and then if I crash into this one, boom, kills us, and now we're on 2, and then crash into that one, goes to 1, crash into this one, and actually goes to game over. So I think really the move here is to take this UI text set text, copy it. We can also put it in lose life, right? So we'll put it just above that. Okay, we'll put it right there between the subtract and the compare. So the number updates, then we update the UI component with that number, and then we do the logic to compare that stuff as to whether or not we should be game over or something.